So today is my last lecture out of 3 lectures. That's my last lecture. And I'm going to repeat a lot of things, but I'll also talk about something new, except for the planned topic, the critical turn in therapeutic education, which we started to discuss last time. And now we'll talk a bit more about it. I will also repeat the whole thing a little bit. And I will also try to develop the idea that Siavash gave me of negative education, what it can mean, what can it mean, because I like everything negative, and what I do is negative psychoanalysis. So logically, the education, the model of education that I would be developing and I would be interested in developing is negative pedagogy, negative model of education. So to remind you this again, I'm very proud of this, and this explains a lot. My problem with contemporary society, which is therapeutic society, as we learned, or psychological society, with those psychologized people, psychological people. So on the left, you see the current understanding of what is human, current understanding of what is society. It's very positive. It's extremely positive. It demands to stay positive, have positive mood. It also assumes that everything is going to be fine in the future. And the model, it imposes the model of the positive model that everything is going to be okay. We have to work towards the good society without any conflicts, without any negative effects. And it's dominated by psychology, by certain kind of psychology that we will discuss. For me, I'm on the other side with philosophy. Those 3 dots means that it's not only philosophy, but a particular kind of philosophy, mostly existential philosophy, and also critical theory we will discuss, and psychoanalysis a little bit. So the opposition to this dominant perspective of psychology, where everything, the positive model, is the negative model. Negative model that existential philosophy suggests is where anxiety or something negative is at the core of a subject and at the core of society, and health, its only way, and this core, something in the middle, it can't be deleted, it can't be annulled. It just exists there, and it's constitutive. It constitutes a subject. It constitutes the society, something negative. And health is the way, something that you can add to it, something that might look as a healthy model, a normal model, normalized model, but still it works with this basic core, which is negative. Unlike in psychological society, the other current society that I'm criticizing, at the core, it sees at the core health, the positivity, harmony, well-being, nothing negative. And it sees anxiety and everything negative as something that you can eliminate, something you can get rid of. And this is where it kind of pushes us towards. So with pedagogy, I will try to switch from the psychological model or current, maybe capitalist model, which is positive in its basis, or suggests the positive model as ideal. I'll try to switch to the other perspective of philosophy of negative model, pedagogy as something negative. And I will use the help of critical theory in psychoanalysis, because those are an existential philosophy, because those are models of thinking that include negativity better. Not perfectly, but still they work with negativity. There are also reasons to criticize them for being not negative enough, but still they're much better than this psychology positive model. So to elaborate and to remind you of what is happening is in current society demands to think positively. Current society, psychologized society. As Philippe Rief told us, it bothered mostly with people feeling good, having positive emotions, and nothing else that much except for it. And there is this demand, repressive demand, to think positively. And if you feel depression, anxiety, or some disharmony, you will be treated as deviation that need to be cured, right? So again, it's not all psychology, because there is this such thing as critical psychology, for example. But when we talk about psychology that underlies this society, that underlies this way of perception, it's mostly, so dominant psychology or mainstream psychology is humanistic and positive psychology. And something that is positive, I will put the plus in it next to it. This is the one that represents the scheme, with the presenting humans and society as harmonious at the core, nothing negative, represented as a natural state of what human is. And of course, the model that we need to pursue of health, of who we are, to coincide with who we are, is completely complete positivity removed, with everything negative being removed out of it. It promotes individual well-being, self-actualization, understood as this, when we get closer to the health without any negativity. It concentrates on individual. It's mostly very individualistic. It emphasizes those positive aspects as happiness, harmony, well-being, and positivity as something we need to attain at the end, and therefore remove everything that is opposite to it. That is, the opposite of happiness might be sorrow, depression. The opposite of harmony is the disharmony. Well-being is the not well-being. Positivity is negativity. So ideally, within this perspective, with this current model of existence, those negative aspects are seen as a deviation that needs to be removed, ideally, in every context. That is, in society, in individual as such, and in education too. Again, the quote from Alenka Zupancic, which relies here this perspective relies on critical theory that we're going to discuss, that contemporary biomorality, which is repressive, it promotes the axiom that good person, the standard role model of our society, is person who is deprived of everything negative, who is not suffering, who has this well-being, harmony within themselves. The suffering person, the person who shows signs of negativity, is a bad person. They're not supposed to exist. They're anti-heroes. And this is how we constitute our own gulag. But but the problem is that not only one problem, but there are many problems. One of the problems is that such people don't exist, those who don't suffer at all, and they won't exist in the future the way psychological society wants them to be. Because if we follow the logic of existential philosophy, we are suffering beings. That's what constitutes us as humans or as someone alive. Therefore, the problem with this perspective is that it's not only gulag because this ideal makes us feel better because we don't coincide with it. It's very oppressive in a way that it promotes the end of humanity, since humanity doesn't exist with its suffering, with its negative aspects. So it's much worse than just our own gulag that makes us feel not perfect some reason when we suffer. It's at the end, if it's true, if existential philosophy is correct, understanding humans as suffering and as not being able to get rid of their suffering, and if they will, they'll get rid of themselves because this is who they are. This model of totally positive model that doesn't allow any negativity promotes the end of humanity. We might be happy, but that might also at the end, but that might also mean that we won't exist, neither as individuals nor as a society. Again, the problem with this perspective that if we eliminate everything negative, the way we now want to, all the conflicts, all these harmonies, all these junctions, the problem is that we might there's going to be no human and no human bond, no society, no individual, neither the subject nor the social bond or society. So, and with therapeutic education, again, it's as a part of therapeutic society, a psychological society. This is the shorter version of a slide that you already saw. The main question, instead of question of transferring knowledge and morality, installation of morality as it was in traditional knowledge, the main question now, something that comes, that starts to be central in maybe current education, maybe not in Russia, maybe in the West. The most important thing is, are children happy? Are students happy? This was criticism from the book, The Dangerous Rise of Therapeutic Education, where authors criticized this therapeutic education as not being exactly education the way it's supposed to be, but more something that resembles the therapy group. And this is their criticism. So the central concern in education, same as in society, do we feel good when we study? For them, it's a problem because it doesn't allow any education the way it's supposed to be, any transfer of knowledge. But yeah, opposition to this, the critical intervention to all of the positive society, positively oriented society, that is therapeutic, that is psychological society, that doesn't allow negativity. The critical intervention to this, something with minus, something that allows, introduces negativity, might be considered from 3 points of view: from existential philosophy, what we did during the first meeting. Critical theory and psychoanalysis. Critical theory and psychoanalysis are interconnected because critical theories takes a lot from psychoanalysis and build some of their theories based on psychoanalysis. So, and this will help me, all of those 3 aspects, to develop this idea of negative pedagogy, actually negative pedagogy instead of the positive pedagogy that doesn't allow negativity. So let's start with what existential philosophy. As you remember, existential philosophy is actually the one that represents this model that I like, the model with negativity at the core. Negativity as something constitutive, as something we can't get rid of it in subject, and in society. And as the way Kierkegaard said in his book, The Concept of Anxiety, he claimed this anxiety is in the center. It's a center upon which everything turns. So we can try to cope with this center, but we can't get, and coping with the center, living with us, with ourselves as suffering beings. We can try to cope with this suffering, but we can never get rid of the suffering. We can never get rid of negative aspects of our existence. Something that hurts, we cannot eliminate it. We can learn to live with it, but never eliminate it completely. And Kierkegaard said that the one who learned to deal with anxiety properly learned the most important thing. So there is nothing else to learn, basically. If anxiety is at the center, of those negative effects or negative aspects of our existence at the center, there is nothing substantial to learn except for to learn how to deal with them. And health, something that seems a health as normality, as the way of life that is possible to live, that is acceptable, is just, it's not health, but it's just not something that eliminated negative aspects of existence, but it's just a way to cope, to live with those negative aspects. And existential pedagogy, one of the researchers who developed this idea, it also was more minus, more negativity than psychological therapeutic pedagogy. It also includes this understanding of human as negative, human existence as negative at its core. Ronald Barnett claimed that being a student is to be in a state of anxiety. It is so what substantially defined student as such, because you learn new things, it's quite hard to do, and it introduces more of uncertainty instead of introducing more certainty. You have more questions about the world, you're more advanced in and the more you know, the more you understand that you don't know a lot of things. So it is quite, being a student, learning on an advanced level is quite hard, and it presupposes anxiety, but not only studentship, but the human existence is such, is being in a state of anxiety, dealing with an anxiety. You can't completely get rid of, like, answer all the questions and establish a way of life that will fully eliminate suffering. It is impossible. Therefore, being a student as part of human existence also suggests anxiety, maybe even more, directly admitting anxiety than in, like, somewhere outside of the university. This is what good in existential pedagogy, in existential point of view, as applied to pedagogy. The other aspect, critical theory. Again, critical theory is one of the points of view that criticizes but not basically, not to the end, and it potentially coincides, as the problem with critical theory, that it might potentially coincide with therapeutic society and psychological point of view, although it's the very strong point of view that criticizes therapeutic society. So Adorno claimed that they don't like, critical theory doesn't like psychology, mainstream psychology, that is humanistic psychology, that is they called I forgot. So they don't like this mainstream idea, mainstream theories of psychology that dominate current society or capitalist society. They claim that all psychotherapy is untrue, therapies are fraud, and it just, what it does, it adjusts people to unhealthy society, and this is how people become sick, because they concentrate on individual happiness, they promote happy consciousness. Each individual has to be happy, and the problem with making individuals happy in unjust society that has to be changed, made more just. The problem with it, that if you make individual happy, you will adjust within the conditions of unjust society. You adapt them, make them part of what critical theories called sick society. And society will stay sick, society will stay unhealthy. This is why happy consciousness is sleeping consciousness, is consciousness that is not that is opposite to revolutionary spirit. It's just happy and closed on itself, egoistic, thinks about its own good, doesn't change anything around it. The problem with critical theory, we'll see maybe later a bit more on this, that it's still calling society sick, and it still kind of implies the idea of healthy society at the end. So they are still therapeutic, critical theorists, from certain point of view. They're still therapeutic, but not they don't deal with individual, they just deal with whole society. So if I criticize therapeutic society, claiming that it tries to eliminate negative aspects of human existence and install some kind of positive ideal of individual that will be forever happy without any suffering. The thing with with critical theories is that they imply that one day, if we'll get rid of this perspective of making individuals happy, one day society will be happy. If we allow negativity now, critical view, negative view, one day this could transform society into a happy society. Therefore, it's also a positive model. It allows only partially, critical theory only partially allows negativity and criticizes positive attitude of mainstream psychology, but only in the name of future social positive model of society, happy, not sick. Although maybe, well, in critical theory, there are two points of view that it can imply. It can stay forever negative, forever critical. That's what I like about it. Or, and that's this tragical perspective. Or it can promote only temporary negativity, and then it still would imply the positive model of society. So let's, we'll talk about it a bit more later. What's next? Yeah, the problem with education as part of unjust society, therapeutic education, the problem that it adapts, as well as psychotherapy, it adapts to the unjust model, unjust social order. The criticism of critical theory that aims to transform education would claim that education in capitalist society is something that makes, same as apparatus of psychology, it transforms student into something that can be coherent, not coherent with the unjust social order. The capitalist order concentrated on competitive individualism, and it promotes, this is what is called pedagogies of discomfort. Unlike Sarah Amster mentions idea of pedagogies of discomfort instead of comfort, meaning that critical pedagogy or pedagogy of discomfort should concentrate more on changing society, not adapting to the unjust society, but being dissatisfied with society and feeling discomfort of existing society, and therefore preserving their ability to change this society, unjust society, in the future. So if existing traditional pedagogies could be called pedagogies of comfort because they adapt students to the existence in unjust society, unjust working conditions, or just capitalist society, making students, transforming students into someone who will feel fine, who will not question the capitalist unjust order, go to work and participate in the competitive individualism, and will have skills to do that without questioning anything, without reflecting critically on anything. This is pedagogies of comfort, basically traditional education that prepares you for, makes you part of sick society. We can talk about patriarchal society maybe, but it's more problematic with this now. Making you part of some social structure that you will leave, that you will not strive to change, just adapt to it and be successful within it. Including the therapeutic aspect of this is that it trains you to manage your negative emotions in the university, not to complain, maybe to be a good worker, stay positive while going through unjust, while suffering from unjust working conditions. So it's pedagogies of comfort, how to feel. They teach you, traditional education teaches you how to feel comfortable within sick society. In opposition to this critical theory, there is this concept of pedagogies of discomfort, that students within critical pedagogy model supposed to have this active attitude towards education, towards society. They have to be able to question existing norms of unjust society, and they have to preserve this revolutionary spirit that will help them to change unjust society and be revolutionary, to develop a critical social consciousness. And to explain, to elaborate a bit more what is critical pedagogy and what is critical theory, what it doesn't like, we can talk about traditional pedagogy first, and some deviations from traditional pedagogy. So in traditional pedagogy, something was assigned plus, it's positive at the end. It suggests, like, really traditional. Initially, pedagogy, universities, schools, the aim was to adapt, to make pupils, to make students a coherent part of society, a part of society. They were considered empty subjects, children, they don't know anything. And the idea was of positive adaptation, to make them, to educate them, acculturить, to make them cultural beings, to install some certain norms of society in them. So at the end, they will become the coherent part of a harmonious part of the society as such. So at the end, going through process of education, traditional pedagogy suggests that they will identify, internalize the values of society. They will internalize the existing institutions of society. And at the end, the student who goes through this process, their desires, their needs will coincide with norms of society. So at the end, when student goes through the process of education, being first nothing, the empty substance filled with proper cultural norms, they internalize it, and then they, at the end, after they graduated, they become a coherent part of society. They won't contradict, they will exist in harmony with society. This, of course, is oppressive thing, right? Because, and at the end, they'll be functional parts of society. They'll go to work or do wherever society requires them, because they're educated in a certain way that society requires them to be educated. They will be happy, coherent, and they'll feel sense of belonging. They'll be together with others who are educated in the same way. This is super oppressive, not super oppressive, but oppressive traditional model of education, because it doesn't allow any negativity, any disharmony, any dissonance. You can't question society here. You just become, within this positive model, you just become a coherent part of society with its existing norms. If they're patriarchal, then follow the patriarchal norms and be happy in your position of a woman, for example, and internalize this position, see it as your own. That's traditional pedagogy. It's positive, suggests this positive transformation, positive model at the end of the transformation that education provides. But then, if you talk about some deviations from this traditional model, for example, John Dewey model reform, which is democratic education, it's also problematic, even though it doesn't suggest the adaptation of a student as an empty being to the external, to the student norms of society. So within traditional model, you have society, and society transforms student in such a way as empty subject, in such a way that this empty subject will become something that coincides perfectly, fits perfectly to something external to it, to the social order. With John Dewey, transition or reform, what might be called, or what was called Copernican revolution. The student becomes the center of education, and education something that revolves around the student. So now the student is not seen as empty entity, but seen as the center, as active being. And student meant to actualize themselves as autonomous, self-conscious entity, and the teacher or professor is just a mentor who helps the child, student to do that, to become, to stay active, to be curious, to develop critical point of view, to develop curiosity. So teacher here is a friend. Teacher here is not the enemy. The curriculum is curricula is formed based on the interest of a student. It's student-centered education, now something that we now perceive as the ideal of democratic education. And it looks, of course, maybe better than traditional education that is oppressive, that is openly oppressive to a student, that treats student as a passive entity. This one is better. It looks better, at least, because now students are at the center. They are active beings. They are those who are at the center. But the problem with the possible criticism with this John Dewey reform is that it might be even worse in certain way than traditional education, because it still implies positive model. It still implies that at the end, after this process of this student-centered education, we will be will come to some kind of happy society of self-actualized individuals. The problem is, so it's underlined, that is underlined by the abstract positive idea. It pretends to be natural or free. It looks like within this educational context, because teacher is a friend, and because student can choose to learn something that is interesting to them. And at the same time, it is still education. It still has its rules, but the problem that it pretends to be free. And when it pretends to be free, when it pretends to be concentrated around the child, it's very hard to fight with it. Because this effect of pressure and hierarchy can be, it's kind of blurred. It's hard to find it, and therefore it still exists there. But you cannot identify it, and it's even worse. It's like might be seen as even something worse than traditional education with hierarchy that imposes clearly, that clearly presents certain rules, certain hierarchies. It presents like it's you are the center. It presents that you are the one. We are all happy. There is no conflict here. Teacher is your friend, but at the same time, and it presented as caring for you. But at the same time, there is this oppressive structure that you can't figure out, you can't discern it, and you can't find it directly. And it creates utopian microcosm within the educational setting. It presents education that there is no disorder, there is no disinterest. All the everything that you learn is your choice. You're constantly excited. There is no conflict between teacher and student, between students, because we are all positive. And the problem, there is this utopian microcosm. First of all, this role playing of the absence of oppression, of the absence of hierarchy. It's different. It's microcosm that is enclosed on itself, and it's separated from the society. This educational setting separates students from society, where things are not that way. When there is disorder, when there is injustice, when there are conflicts, and students are kind of within this microcosm. They are not adapted, or they are not ready to face the sickness of and unjustness of something outside of this microcosm, and therefore they kind of might be politically disinterested, because they might prefer to exist within this comfortable microcosm of education that is presented as completely positive. But with critical, what's the problem with critical pedagogy, critical theory, and why it criticizes, why critical theory criticizes traditional order of things and traditional pedagogy? first of all, critical theory as such, on which critical pedagogy is based, it assumes that humans are deviation, that humans have this dynamic and reflexive nature. And humans as such are subjects of deviation. So what differentiates humans from other types of animals, and I don't agree with this, but still just to explain your logic, for critical theorists would be that humans, unlike animals, they deviate from their context of, from their surrounding, from the context of their existence. They would, they have this dissonance in themselves. They, to form their self-consciousness, they have to be in contradiction and opposition with the supposedly harmony of nature, or with harmony of certain society. The human, not soul, but human substance is not fixed. Human consciousness is something that arises in conflict and opposition to existing order of things, be it nature. I don't agree with animals being different from humans in this. Like, animals within this scheme, animals are seen as a coherent within harmonious nature, and human as something that deviates. For me, evolution as such and all the creatures as such are deviations. So it's rather not the difference between humans and animals, but nature is such, is deviation from itself. But what constitutes subject, human subject, is this deviation, the critical negative attitude, negation of existing fixed, of something that it exists in, something that is fixed, something that surrounds humans. Subject. And this is why criticism, the critical nature, to criticize, is something that fits the nature of a person. And criticism has negational nature. It coincides, critical theory coincides with this nature of human subject. And to deny this negational nature of human subject, to deny this negativity that forms human consciousness as such, that forms human as such, is act of oppression. So to transform anything into the coherent whole, to transform human society, to aim in transforming human society into whole without conflicts, means to oppress, or to try to adapt, to adjust human with this contradictory nature to the certain fixed norms, fixed norm, any norms that are fixed in society. It means to oppress the nature of a human, because it won't be contradicting, it won't contradict to anything anymore. And this is the consciousness that is happy consciousness, that is sleeping consciousness. And therefore, the problem with this dualist pedagogy is same as the problem with traditional pedagogy. With traditional pedagogy was openly oppressive, trying to transform as a result of education, society and students, make students as a coherent part of society without conflict, only in harmony, to adapt them to existing norms. It's oppressive because it contradicts this nature, conflicting nature of a human that supposed to form itself into contradiction, being against existing norms, being against something. But the problem with dualist thing is that it's already all positive. Like, there is nothing to be against of, because the teacher is a friend, you are all in harmonious unity, you choose what you learn. There is nothing, and there is no hierarchies in this kind of education. So it's problematic for critical pedagogy because there is nothing to be against of. It is oppressive in this being, in pretending to be coherent, harmonious whole, right? Whereas there's no suffering, when there is no conflicts, when all the knowledge is kind of interesting and exciting. So with this harmonious type of education, it's also problematic because there is nothing to be against on, and the consciousness, the critical consciousness, cannot be formed within such pedagogy. And critical pedagogy would be the one that actually coincides with the nature of human being, nature that is at conflict. If you stop the conflict, if you make person fit into something, some existing norms, even the best norms ever, it's still oppressive, because the human spirit won't have something in opposition to what it can develop itself. So this critical theory, from this point of view, critical theory is forever critical. It can never be good enough to such extent that you'll stop being critical, that you'll exist in a coherent, happy, non-conflict, without any conflicts society. Once you stop, once you attain this state, like Dewey's model of education suggests, it is oppressive, no matter how good it looks. If you reach the heaven, if you stop being critical, you basically disappear. You're not human, you are manipulated, you are fixed, and you're not human anymore, you're oppressed. So what is critical pedagogy? Yeah, critical pedagogy works in a different way. I think we had this slide before. Critical pedagogy doesn't adapt learners to the existing state, but it transforms participants in such a way that they will be open to mutual cooperation and be actively prosocial, but it still will be aiming to eradicate existing elements of oppression and social injustice, not justice. So, and tricky thing is that it's not something temporary. It's not something that you, there is no final revolution. You can't eliminate all the injustice and then exist happily ever after within the just society. It can get better, but the problem is the better it gets, the worse it gets. The more society starts to be just, the more, for example, sensitive we are to something that remains. Like with new sensitivity, with new ethics, the less abuse we have in society. And technically, if you look objectively on statistics, society is now less abusive, but somehow we feel that it's more abusive because we are very sensitive to something that remains. And it contradicts our non-abusive society, maybe not our, but like Western's not abusive society, that it feels more abusive to us than it is. So it will never get better. It will get better, but we won't feel it. For us, it will be still something will remain still to be in opposition to. Once we start to think that this is perfect, there is no injustice, this is oppressive, you are manipulated. So once you feel that it's better, perfect, and this is the way it should stay, that's not good. This is not emancipation. Unfortunately, sometimes critical theory is presented as something you go through a revolution, you establish this heaven, you exist without any conflicts, eliminated, with all the negative aspects eliminated. But unfortunately, this is when critical theory transforms into the therapeutic society, into its opposite. It won't get better. It will get, if it will get better, it will get worse at the same time. This is the idea of proper, radical, critical pedagogy, critical theory, the way it's supposed to be. It never ends. It works, it's effective, it works effectively on making society better, but it never stops in seeing oppressive elements, in seeing negative, in existing, never stop being dissatisfied, never stop being discontent. So what else? Psychological, the problem again with contemporary therapeutic and psychological point of view, where we were talking about it before, is that our society is so psychological that we can't simply go back to and we shouldn't simply go back to the old models of education that wasn't psychological or wasn't therapeutic before, because it's conservative. It still suggests that we have some fixed model, ideal model that existed in the future, And now we need to abandon this psychological model and go back to the previous one. It's impossible, we shouldn't do it. So what we stuck with the therapeutic culture, therapeutic us, psychological us, who think in psychological terms, and we still probably want to be critical. So the way out is to perform out. That will never work to the end, is to perform critical turn in therapeutic education. This is what Katie Wright suggests and Sarah Amster. We're going to discuss them during the seminar, I hope. So what they suggest that we need to perform, we need to keep, or not that we need to keep, but it's impossible to change ourselves so that we won't be psychological anymore, because we are. And according to them, criticism of therapeutic education is conservative. It's even worse than therapeutic education or psychological education or psychological society. The criticism is even worse than those are, because it's conservative. It suggests that we need to go somewhere back to something even more oppressive. What they suggest is that a therapeutic turn in education is not that bad, because there are some aspects of it that are compatible with critical education, such as it's not only concentrating on individual well-being, happiness, and nothing else matters, but there is also this aspect of understanding others, of being more just towards others, because you understand them better, because you have this emotional intelligence developed as a result of psychological therapeutic education. So what they suggest is to stay within therapeutic education, but perform critical turn. This is keep those elements and develop those elements of therapeutic education that are compatible with critical turn, and develop them further, like emotional intelligence that helps to understand other, make society more inclusive, less biased, more empathic, and cultivate those aspects. And it coincides with critical theorist idea of like Marcuse, and critical pedagogists like Freire coincides with their idea that we need to develop this new type of being, human being, who would have a certain emotional abilities, emotional intelligence, to not only to think about themselves and to compete with others, but also to be sensitive to others, to leave the prison of their narcissism. So it's also therapeutic in these aspects. Again, the critical turn in therapeutic education would then concentrate on independent critical thinking. That is, stay critical, never give up being negative. Plus, it emphasizes this emotional component of understanding and empathy of others. But I will talk about it at the end. It's very important to still. So what I want this education model to be okay. It is therapeutic in certain way. It's also critical, but it's also negative, and it's also pro-social. But being negative and pro-social means that we can keep this empathy to others. It's important. We can make this accent on sociality, but we should not perceive this as coinciding with other incoherent whole in harmony, because same as the core of human existence, of subjective, of individual existence, is negative aspect. The core of social bond, of us connecting to each other, is also negative. So, and this is what sometimes in critical theory, and this Sarah Amster not really recognizes. They suggest that ideally later we'll be happily all together without any conflicts. And we'll talk about psychoanalysis a little bit later, and I'll show you that it won't happen. So this mutual support, cooperation, inclusiveness, but it still includes this new sociality within educational context and within context of general of society. It still should include the negative element. The last thing, not the last, still have time. The last thing is psychoanalysis as a third viewpoint that helps to develop negative pedagogy, the model of negative critical pedagogy. Psychoanalysis, same as not same, but in a similar way, like critical theory, and they are connected with critical theory in a similar way as existential philosophy. It includes, why I like it, because it includes this negativity. It doesn't try to eradicate it, to eliminate it like mainstream psychology. For example, for Lacan, to understand the basic maybe thing in psychoanalysis, he thought of a subject as varied subject, a subject that it constitutes around the lack, constitutes around this negative, absolutely negative aspect of its existence, that it's existence of subject as such. So it's not that simple that there is subject and subject is all positive. And if there is some negativity, we need to get rid of this negativity. In psychoanalysis, subject is constitutively negative. It's constitutively paradoxical. It includes, it's based on the absence of itself. Not only subject, but social bond. We'll talk about social bond in psychoanalysis at the end. There is such thing as negative psychoanalysis that Russell Jacoby develops, and I talk about it and also try to develop it. So negative psychoanalysis as such is negative, but to maybe emphasize its negative nature, we can talk about negative psychoanalysis. For Jacoby, it's also the psychoanalysis that is based on critical theory as such, the practice of critical theory, or the other name of critical theory proper. It includes two aspects, the negation of subjectivity and negation of positivity. So first negation of subjectivity is in opposition to individualistic capitalist society. It claims that it aims to get rid of illusion that subjects exist separately from the rest of society, and it sees consciousness as historical, as subjective consciousness as historical as social consciousness. So meaning that this negation kind of helps to connect. And the other aspect of negation of negative psychoanalysis, negation of positivity, meaning it's critical about this positive attitude in society, in capitalist society that aims for complete positivity and enjoyment. It tries to destigmatize, to emancipate the feeling of discontent, sadness, revolt, because it sees it as this dissatisfaction as the revolutionary power that can transform. If we admit that we suffer, that we sad, that we anxious, this is negation of existing order, and we can change something. So this is why negative critical theory, negative psychoanalysis likes negative emotions. It doesn't think that we need to get rid of it. Otherwise, our consciousness will be this sleeping, happy consciousness that is completely satisfied with something terrible condition it exists within. Negative psychoanalysis, again, my favorite quote is that where Jacoby talks about negative psychoanalysis as critical theory, and it's something that listens instead of chasing the happiness. It's something that actually listens to the voice of sadness and voice of revolt. This is why it's negative. But the problem with Jacoby, as the problem with critical theory as such, is that he sees negative psychoanalysis as psychoanalysis of the era of capitalism. So again, meaning that someday it implies belief that one day there's going to be maybe no capitalism or no evil in any form, and then we can get rid of negative effects, then we can get rid of negativity. But for me, again, this means that critical theory implies that now it's sad present, we can admit it's sad, we can admit our sadness to change it, to make it better, but at the end, it kind of implies that it's going to be happy future, happy, coherent, harmonious, all the positive stuff. Again, critical theories sometimes act as therapeutic theories, implying at the end that society will be society of happy people. which is not, for me, not the critical theory proper. Critical theory is forever critical, it's forever negation, it's forever sadness and suffering. Even if it's getting better, it's still at the same time getting worse. So this is the problem. And negative pedagogy. Last couple of slides. Negative pedagogy, what can it mean? So negative pedagogy, again, it's critical pedagogy that is properly critical, and somehow it implies this psychoanalytic point of view and existential point of view, that this negative aspects of our existence at the core, we can never eliminate them, and we shouldn't pretend that we did, like in Dewey's model of education. Otherwise, it's also oppressive. It also cancels our self-consciousness, our reflectivity, which is also always negative, always in opposition. So negative pedagogy would be critical model in education that is based on negation. It would reject the positive adaptation and reconciliation of elements. So it doesn't aim at the final reconciliation. It doesn't aim to get rid of all the conflicts. It's somehow it somehow includes or embraces the negativity. It's the opposite of oppressive one, and the one who pretend not to be oppressive, like Dewey's. It rejects positive logic of ideologies of socialization and adaptation, that it doesn't try to transform student into something that is coherent with the existing society, or something that is even coherent with the institution itself. It deals with the with negative reflection. It preserves negative reflection of a student. It doesn't aim to make a student a coherent part of some fixed society with its existing norms, even if it's perfect society. It just deals with students being against something, being in conflict with something. And it allows this maintenance of dissonance, either within the student and between the student or another student, so between the student and teachers or administration. This is negative pedagogy with properly minus or properly critical. So there are some models of negative pedagogy, and one of them is suggested by Boaz Tabar in his paper Resistance and Imperfection as Educational Work. And he claims that, again, that negative pedagogy would be the pedagogy that preserves this negativity at the core of human subject. It won't try to eliminate as the roots of all evil, this dissonance, the conflict, the negation, but it will somehow seek to maintain it, to make it the cornerstone of emancipatory pedagogy. And also, yeah, this one. So the negative pedagogy will not try to eliminate negative things, the dissonance, the disharmony, but will deal with within the student and between students and other elements of pedagogy education. But it will try to preserve it, will try to embrace it. And again, according to his point of view, this negative pedagogical model, it won't pretend to be free, harmonious, deprived of hierarchy and clear rules like Dewey's model did. It pretends that it's the choice of a student, or the student choose whatever they want, but there is still rules, and which are presented as taking care of a student, but they are at the same time oppressive, and even more oppressive because they are presented as non-oppressive. I mean, there is nothing to fight because everything is for your own good. In this pedagogy, it will be clear and like genuine, truthful about being having hierarchy, having clear rules, being not harmonious. It won't pretend to be free. it will allow students rebellious spirit in a form, for example, non-cooperation. Students are allowed not to. It will be boring, right? You are allowed to feel bored. You're allowed to mock teacher. You are allowed to feel disinterest, refusal. So his idea is that you need to preserve something in relation to which you will be opposed, and you will feel you will develop your self-consciousness because you are opposed to it. It's not supposed to satisfy every need of a student, because the satisfaction of every need of a student, it makes the student disinterested in political matters, existing in this illusionary free world, and not being able to be in opposition to something. So it can be student can be, the teacher can be this teacher can be an enemy to a student, and students can be enemies to each other. The problem with this model of education is that it's kind of already exists. And SAS, for example, SAS fits really well to this model, because it doesn't pretend like Western universities to be free and to satisfy and to be just, and at the same time being oppressive, because you don't have what to oppose to yourself. But here we have some elements of oppressiveness, but it's still possible to sometimes still possible, and you are developing your critical consciousness in opposition to it. So there is some clear evil as administration and some professors who are and some rules who are clear rules. And maybe this is why we have at the CS this very good spirit of cooperation between students, because it's against this negative core, and this allows the cooperation. But the problem is what this negative pedagogy improves is if it's SAS already. And the other problem is, when you preserve, nothing changes, because when you claim that you need to preserve something in which students will be in opposition to, and how they will develop their own interest in something in opposition, for example, something not interesting, something not important, that this changes nothing. It's still hierarchy will be preserved, clear rules, oppressive rules will be preserved. So, but yes, I'm not sure how my innovative and this innovative idea of negative pedagogy contradicts already existing pedagogy, because it will still preserve Sherbinov, right? Something to be in opposition to and something to form student cooperation in relation to. But at the same time, it's not traditional education, and it doesn't pretend like some education to be fully free, to put the student on the center. It's just clear evil. And because of this clear evil, you develop in your critical consciousness, you cooperate between, you organize something, you influence something sometimes, but there is still Sherbinov, right? And maybe it's not traditional, because traditional would be that you're not allowed to be in opposition to. Here, at least to some extent, there is both. There is evil, and there is you influence and change in this evil. Not always you can be excluded if it's too much, but there is still, it's not traditional, and it's not completely this idealistic dualist model of education, which also oppressive, but pretends not to be. And this is how kind of there is no way to be critical about anymore. So here you have both, right? And maybe it's better than not have something one, either perfect model that pretends to be perfect, or model that is actually awful and oppressive. That's all. Do you have questions? How much time do we have?